Welcome. Dr. Thomas Hatfield is an American scholar, writer, and historian with an expertise in America's military heritage. His life is dedicated to promoting knowledge of the military, and we're here to find out why that is so very important. Welcome, Dr. Hatfield.
I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you here in El Paso, and we know that you're with UT Austin in their Center for Military Studies, but most recently, you've just completed a book that's doing rather well on Rudder, from leader to legend. What led you to write a book about this gentleman?
Well, the subject of the book is a biography of a man by the name of James Earl Rudder. Mm-hmm. Rudder is fairly well known as a war hero, Second World War, Normandy, Battle of the Bulge, and a few other places. And he ended his career as the president of Texas A&M, and I think it's for that he is really most remembered. I wanted him to be remembered for his entire life. Mm-hmm. But at A&M, where he was the president in the 1960s, mm-hmm. He saved an institution that was in decline, mm-hmm. and saving it meant that the admission of women and making military training optional. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of young men did not want to go to college where there were no girls and where military training was required. Mm-hmm. And I was one of those. Oh. But Rudder, he was the Rudder. He made the difference. He had the prestige and the influence, and essentially he saved Texas A&M and put it on the path to becoming a really great graduate and research institution that it is. That's
really a very, very important role, especially to Aggie moms like me. My son is an Aggie, so.
Well, you know what I'm talking? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I know what you're talking about. Sure. Now, you say that he's best known for A&M, but actually, his life story is very interesting, and you said he was very involved in the war. So what is so fascinating about this man, and why was he such a great leader?
Well, I think the fact that he was such an extraordinary leader is what makes him fascinating. Mm-hmm. And since the book came out, I've had 3 movie producers to come to me to talk about the possibility of making a movie about his life. Ah. And the question they leave me with is what were his qualities that enabled him to be such an extraordinary leader? Mm-hmm. And I think that the first of those qualities is that he was a person of tremendous character. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you don't develop a really strong character with an easy life. Here's a boy who comes out of a town that's hardly known anymore, near San Angelo. He's in obscurity, he's impoverished. He goes off to college with less than $100 and all of his possessions in one cardboard suitcase. And from that, he carves out a whole career. So if you look at his life, mm-hmm. what you see is the development of character. He can show a young person how to take hold on the wall of life, how to be a good citizen, how to grasp onto a career. And you can see him literally graduating from Texas A&M when in the depths of the Depression, mm-hmm. No jobs are available, an even more dire situation than now.
That was in the Great Depression.
That's right, the Great Depression. Really he graduated in 1932, mm-hmm. and his first job was working on a road crew, digging ditches, and that was a time when roads built with more by manual labor than they were with heavy equipment.
Now, had he graduated from college at that time?
Yes, he had.
So that was his college graduation job right there.
Well, the first part, it took him 3 years to get through a 2-year college. He went to the equivalent of a community college in Stephenville, Texas, which is now known as Tarleton State University. Mm-hmm. Transferred from there to A&M, graduated from A&M in a timely way, was a football coach before the war, and when he went off to the war, he really had been put through the crucibles of making progress with his own career, not only through college and through his coaching career. And the war signified something else that was interesting about Rudder, is that he never actually pursued any job. That people who were in authority would come to admire him and would reach down and select him for some terrifically important job. So early in the war, he became a commander of the 2nd Ranger Battalion, which is one of the most esteemed units in the history of the U.S. Army. Mm-hmm. He does that. He is promoted from that to being a regimental commander. After the war, he became the commissioner of the General Land Office in Texas and had to basically saved that state agency, which is manages the most the greatest wealth of the people of Texas, which is their land and all the resources that are under the land, which in the agency had been compromised with unlawful acts by its leadership, and so Rudder saves all of it.
So he's really quite extraordinary. So can you tell us a story from his early life, which kind of epitomizes his character and what he was like from his early life?
Well, I think that his father was a negative role model.
That's another very significant thing.
It's quite significant.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that his father was a bad fellow. It's just he never quite found he found his niche. Mm-hmm. And Rudder never spoke about his father even to his children. But the father also, Rudder is very curious through his whole life about people and relationships between people. When I asked people who had worked with him, was he curious? Because curiosity is sort of the essence of being a human being. You know, it's the essence, of inquiry. It keeps us going. What will happen next? Or why did such and
It's kind of a godlike characteristic, I think, from the standpoint of the ability to wonder about something. It distinguishes us from animals, I think.
Well, what he wonders most about, according to people who were with him, and I was with him a few times, was it's about people and about the relationships between people. So he's very observant and studying those. And so I think in studying his father, he realized, or he could see, the flaws in his father, and he became in many ways the polar opposite.
Fascinating. A lot of times, so there must not have been a lot of bitterness in him, because when people do that out of bitterness and say, I'll never be like my dad or never be like my mom, they often end up becoming exactly like him with that bitter spirit in them. So he must have really looked at it from a much more intellectual, humble perspective.
You're right on to one of the most important qualities about him, which was that he never looked back. He was always looking toward to the future.
Yeah.
And we all know people who go through life with grievances.
Right.
They have a gunny sack of grievances. It may be some old love or some job they didn't, some promotion they didn't get, or some job they lost, and it taints and affects them for the rest of their lives.
Right.
Well, Rudder never looked back. If he had a spat with someone, or if even like some great triumph, the next day was a new day, and you built and you went from there.
Right.
There were no grievances that carried over either in his family or in his workplace.
Right. Well, that's actually very scriptural, because Scripture says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. In other words, get rid of it, make amends, sleep well, and start the next day fresh. So that's actually very, very scriptural concept. And I think it must have been foundational to his success. Like you say, he didn't carry a lot of baggage with him.
Well, it's the bane of his historian, that is for me, because he didn't care about creating a record. He never, during the war, or even while he was in the land office as commissioner of the General Land Office of Texas, or at Texas A&M, he never had time for historians. He might have time for a newspaper or magazine writer, for which there would be a story that would appear. you know, in very short order.
Right.
But as far as creating a record that really was a historical record, he had no interest in that, in doing that. And so as a result, I had to do a lot of digging and a lot of research in order to reconstruct his life.
And how did you do that? Where do you start with something like that if there's not a lot written about him necessarily other than these things?
Well, I had to start with any personal papers and records, and then I had to get into government, military, and government documents, as well as I went to every place that was important in his entire life, whether it was in Texas, elsewhere in the United States, it was in England, France, Germany, Luxembourg, Belgium. Any place that was important to Rudder in his life, I went there to try to gain the perspective that he had.
So could you give us an example of some place you went and how it gave you a perspective on him?
Oh, heavens. Well, the one the one that really took my breath away was I was in Germany, and I was south of Aachen, in a place that in the military history we refer to as the Hurtgen Forest.
And I knew Hurtgen Forest?
Hurtgen Forest, H-U-E-R-T-G-E-N.
Okay.
That's a U.S. Army term, and there's a village in the area by the name of Hurtgen. And I knew that he'd been in the area for about 2 weeks, and he'd had a command. He'd been under heavy shell fire, and his command post had been under a thick slab of concrete, but I didn't know what had been above the concrete, and besides, it was mostly all destroyed by then. And so I mentioned to the German lady, the Frau Goebbels, what I was looking for. And she said, well, that could only be one place. And I said, well, where is that? She said, well, it's the wine cellar of this hotel. Oh. And so when she led me into the wine cellar, it was as though I had changed places with Rudder.
Wow.
Because I had been living his life for the previous 2 weeks, so that I used to weigh about 30 pounds more than I do, but I forgot to eat. I would be so excited while I was following through on the details of his life. And when I walked into what is now the wine cellar, I knew that I had walked into the place that had been his command post, in which he really never left for about 2 weeks. And the late Frau Goebbels went on to tell me that when she and her husband purchased a hotel in the building that became their hotel in 1984, that would be 40 years after the war, there was still U.S. Army equipment, beds and old radios, still in the basement.
Wow. And
the walls were tinted yellow from the cigarette smoke accumulated. Amazing. So that is a place where that is an example that was like transposing the soul, in which I exchanged places with Rudder.
Wow. And so does that then enable you to gain more insight to him as a person?
Well,
what
it's
does
a
it
kind
do
of
for you?
It gives, yes, and it also is a kind of feeling that a historian or an artist wants. I think that I was able then to write much more vividly and much more sensitively about him and his life, based on that experience, and then what men told me, men who'd been with him, that he would never go to any place that was identified with being the rear, because that suggested comfort, a warm place, and the better foods that he had, that he stayed up front.
And why was that? Why? So in other words, he wanted to be out in the front, leading, risking, pushing forward. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that first of all, he wanted the first-hand information on which he could base his decisions, and related to that is that he had this. It was a caring for the men under his command, that he was going to do his very best, do his best by them. He was doing his duty to look after the men under his command, and not to jeopardize their lives if he could possibly help it.
Right. And so that's another character quality, is tremendous courage, tremendous concern and empathy for the people who were under his leadership, and obviously intellect from the standpoint that that's where he's going to get the best information, so he understands
Well,
that.
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, but you're really on to another aspect of leadership, which is about empathy, which is seeing the world or seeing situations from the other person's point of view, but also your intuition,
Right.
which goes beyond empathy. It's not just having a feeling, but taking action. Another part of it, of the character, which men and also family or where people he came in contact with him would tell me that the sense of gratitude, the gratitude that he would have for the people who were around him, the gratitude he would have for what they did for him, the gratitude he would have for even having a job. You see, and that is also another one of the sort of indicators that goes into
Right.
that makes up character.
You know, absolutely. People who are grateful, who see the positives, the blessings, and even in the smallest thing, or give out a positive energy, emanate a warmth that people, I think, relate to and are drawn to. You know, definitely. So yeah, that sense of gratitude is also another important biblical concept, which the Psalms wonderfully illustrate, is King David's gratitude to God for his provision. So he was quite a fascinating man, it sounds like. And so all of these characteristics carried over after his military career. Is that correct?
That's right, and that's another excellent point, because what his life illustrates is sort of the transferability of skills, and I'm talking leadership skills from the military into civilian life.
And so I think that probably says a kind of a plus and a minus about having mandatory military service versus a whole generations of young men now who have never had that experience, and maybe we're missing out on some of the character development that happens in the military that might not happen otherwise. I mean, would you say that the military really is an excellent forging ground for leadership characteristics, or maybe I'm putting words in your mouth?
Well, we have as fine a military now as we have ever had, and it's because, for the most part, the men and women who are there, who are in the service, are there because they want to be.
Right.
But there are a lot of people who has attitude is similar to mine, which is that it wouldn't be a bad idea if we were to spread some of this burden around, and we had a larger percentage of our population does see military service, the regimentation and the discipline that comes from it, the sense of service, serving a cause far larger than yourself, learning teamwork, how much we are dependent on others, regardless of their status or their rank. They pull us through.
Right.
All of those are important qualities.
Right. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, if you have people who want to be there, then they're going to be more dedicated, more committed, more professional. But on the other hand, for broader society and civilization, military experience and compulsory military experience does help to forge people's character. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. Now, you have been to most of, might I say all of, the key battle sites for the United States and the world. Is that correct? Almost all of them?
Well, if you're referring to the Second World War.
Right.
Well, I've been over large parts of it in Western Europe, Mediterranean, Pacific Ocean areas, island fighting from Tarawa to Peleliu to Guadalcanal, and
And so what would you say is the most significant battle fought in particularly World War II, but in contemporary American history?
Well, you know, that's there's no easy answer because everyone who is in a battle views it from different perspectives, and of course, many battles are there are air battles, there's sea battles, there are land battles. But I suppose if I had to say one place that one battle that more nearly captures it, would have to be Normandy. And that period from June 6, 1944 until the late summer, the Battle of Normandy really ended with the liberation of Paris on August the 25th. And that in the immensity of the scale, the risk involved, what would have been the consequences had it failed, the risk and the gains that came from it.
So why did they think that Normandy, why was that battle conceived in the first place? What was the goal of that battle?
Well, the goal was to drive into the heart of Germany and to destroy the Germans' will to wage war and their industrial capacity to wage war, and to destroy their army, which, as General Eisenhower would say, was the finest army in the history of the world up to that point.
Wow.
So it was the main effort by the Western Allies to win the war against Germany. And having said that, we should always remember that at least 3 out of every 4 Germans who were killed in World War II were killed on the Eastern Front against the Russians.
Oh.
So, you know, the war could only have been won with a coalition, and the coalition forged between the British and the Americans was undoubtedly the finest coalition ever put together for war. One of the wonderful lines from Napoleon was about coalitions, that he would rather fight against coalitions than with them.
Yeah, because that coordination can be very tricky, very political.
That's right.
And we see a lot of that happening in historical movies and so forth. Now, you said that the Battle of Normandy had tremendous significance for America, right? In terms of,
yes, it did.
Of catapulting us onto the world stage in a very important way. What was that?
Well, really, it's from that day, June 6, 1944, that the United States became undoubtedly a superpower.
So that was really the thing that catapulted us to superpower status.
That's right. Well, until then, it's difficult for people to understand this now, but until then, we were a junior partner to the British. When I tell my students, certainly undergraduate students at UT Austin, try to explain to them the importance of Great Britain back then, they can't quite understand it, that this little island that's off the coast of Western Europe was that important.
Yeah.
But the British really were the senior partners, and under the leadership of Winston Churchill, were asserting an influence on the war and the way it was conducted that was far in excess of their numbers. But after the Normandy invasion, the United States was paramount and has remained so since then.
And so it was that battle which made us not only the military leader, but the world leaders, the world powers.
The superpower of the world.
Yeah,
that's right.
What would have happened if Normandy would have failed in its objectives?
Well, that's too many potential possibilities to answer your question. I'll take a wing at in one way. Let's say it had failed. Then the element of surprise would have been lost. It could not have been launched again for at least a year. The Germans could have turned their full might onto the Russians. Probably would not have succeeded, but the Russians could have come on and perhaps they would have driven all the way across Western Europe and as a consequence, you would have had the so-called Iron Curtain would have been on the Atlantic coast of Western Europe, rather than down through the Central Europe as it was, and all of Europe could have been communist, and not just the Eastern, not just Eastern Europe. Political consequences. Churchill and Roosevelt probably would have probably been voted out of office. Mm-hmm. Roosevelt had to face an election that fall. Churchill could have been voted out of office on any day. So those are some of the immense consequences mm-hmm. that could have come from the failure.
And I don't think we realize or appreciate that a lot of times. The incredible importance of military battles. And just, we're again, you're absolutely fascinating, and I wish we had more time, but when we look, do you think it's ever going to be possible to not have military battles? I mean,
no.
Why not? I mean, people think, oh well, we could if we could just have peace, if we could just be nice to each other, then everything would be okay. So, give us the historian's perspective about that.
Well, it goes all the way back into Greek times, more than 2,000 years ago. We've been speculating on what are the causes of war. What are they? Avarice, greed, envy, beliefs. We'll say it now, religious beliefs. Mm-hmm. Clashes in lifestyle. They're all of the economic issues. The United States is a two-ocean nation, mm-hmm. And we have economic ties in Asia as well as across the Atlantic, and it's almost inevitable that there will be some disputes that can't be resolved short of war. So I would say no. We may have extended periods of peace, mm-hmm. and actually we've not had a major wars now since World War II.
Right. Well, I guess that's a positive. We are unfortunately out of time, Dr. Hatfield. It has been a delight to speak with you, and I've learned so much from you.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, right. Well, I know I've gained a greater understanding of the role of the military in our history. And how about you? Please let us know what you think on the social media. Thank you so much for watching.